Good morning, year ones. It's time for another couple of chapters of the Enchanted Wood. It's our last week this week, so we've got to finish the book. We've only got a few more chapters to go, so we should finish it by the end of the week. Now, if you remember on Friday, the red goblins had taken over the faraway tree, and who was it who'd told them about a plan to rescue them all? It was the trees, wasn't it? And they told the trees told the children to climb up the slippery slip. So we're on to chapter 27 now, a most exciting night. Okay. If only we can creep up the slippery slip that turns right round and round in the middle of the trunk and get to Moonface's at the top, we shall be able to help him, said Joe, feeling about for the trapdoor. I wonder why Moonface didn't slip down it himself, said Beth. Oh, he'd think that there would be plenty of red goblins at the bottom of the tree, ready to catch him when he flew out of the trapdoor, said Joe. But I don't believe they know about this slide. He found the trapdoor and swung it open. Hold it open for me whilst I climb in, he said. Beth held it. Joe began to climb up. But dear me, it was most terribly slippery. He simply couldn't manage to get up the slippery slip at all. As fast as he climbed up a little way, he slid down again. He groaned. I bet it's like trying to climb up a slide, if you've ever tried to do that before. I know I have. It's really tricky. This is awful. We can never get up this way. I shall keep slipping down all the time. Let me try, said Beth eagerly. So Joe slid out of the trapdoor and Beth crept in. But it was just the same for her as for Joe. The slide was far too steep and slippery to be climbed. Wisher, 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 said the trees nearby. Beth ran to one, put her arms around its trunk and pressed her left ear to it. She listened. Tell the squirrel to go, whispered the leaves. Tell the squirrel to go. Red squirrel, you go up, said Beth at once. Can you manage to, do you think? Yes, said the squirrel. I have claws on my feet to hold with, and I am used to climbing. But what's the use of me going? I'm not clever enough to make plans with Moonface. Wisher, 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 said the trees loudly. Joe pressed his ear to one. The squirrel can throw a rope down the slippery slip, whispered the tree. Of course, said Joe in delight. Why didn't I think of it? Tell us, said the girls. Joe told them. The squirrel must climb the slide to the top. He must ask Moonface for the rope that is let down for the cushions. But instead of letting it down through the branches of the tree, he must let it down through the slide instead. Then we can hang on and be pulled up. Oh, that's a really good idea, said Beth. Shh, said Joe, as he heard a shout from a goblin up the tree. We don't want them to guess what we're doing. The goblins are coming down, whispered Franny in alarm. I can hear them. What shall we do? We'd better get inside the trapdoor and sit at the bottom of the slippery slip as quiet as mice, whispered Joe. Go in first, squirrel, and climb up. You know what to do, don't you? Yes, said the squirrel, and disappeared up the slide, digging his sharp claws into it, just as if he were climbing up the outside of a tree trunk. Joe pushed Beth inside, and then Franny. He climbed in himself and shut the trapdoor just in time. 3 goblins jumped down to the foot of the tree and began hunting around them. I know I heard someone, said one of them. There you go, there's the 3 goblins. There, searching around at the bottom of the tree, trying to find the trapdoor. Well, so long as we don't let them pass us up the tree, they can't do much, said another with a laugh. I don't think you heard anyone. It was just the trees whispering. Wisher, 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 said the trees at once. There, what did I tell you, said the goblin. They jumped back into the boughs of the faraway tree and the children hugged one another and chuckled. "I wonder if the squirrel has got up to the top of the slide yet," said Joe. As he spoke, a little sound came down the slide, a soft, slinky sound, and something touched them. "Ooh, a snake!" cried Beth in alarm. "Don't be silly. It's the rope that the good little squirrel has sent down," said Joe, feeling it. "Now we'd better go up one at a time, for Moonface will never be able to pull us all up at once." Franny went first. She was hauled all the way up the slide. It was very strange, so dark and quiet. At last she reached the top. Moonface was there, red-faced from pulling the rope. A light burned in his funny round room. He was simply overjoyed to see Franny. He hugged her and then sent down the rope for Beth. She came up and then Joe. "Don't make too much noise," said Moonface in a low voice as he hugged them all. "The goblins are outside everyone's door." "Oh, Moonface, we're so sorry you are captured like this," said Joe. "Bless you. Couldn't you have slid down the slide and escaped? Or did you think that there might be goblins at the bottom?" "Well, I did," said Moonface. "But I also thought that if I slid down, I'd be leaving all my friends behind in the tree. And that seemed a mean thing to do." "Yes, it would be rather mean," said Joe, "to save yourself and leave the others." "Moonface, what can we do to help?" "Well, I simply don't know," said Moonface. "I've thought and I've thought, but I can't think of anything really good at all." "It's a pity Silky isn't here," said Joe. "We could talk it all over with her then. She's very clever." "We can't possibly get to her," said Moonface. "She's locked in, just as I am." "Joe, Moonface," said Franny suddenly, her face red with excitement. "I've thought of a way to help." "What?" cried the others. "Well, couldn't the red squirrel slip down the slide out of the trapdoor and take a note to the elves in the wood?" asked Franny. "Do you remember how we helped them when we first came to the wood? They said they would always be pleased to help us if we wanted them." "Yes, but how could they help?" asked Moonface doubtfully. Nobody quite knew, but Joe suddenly nodded his head and gave a squeal. "Shh," said everyone at once. "Sorry," said Joe, "but I really have got an idea at last. Listen. The red squirrel can tell the elves to come up here in crowds. We'll pull them up on the rope. Then Moonface can shout out to the goblins outside that he'll tell them the magic spells they want to know, and when they open the door, and the elves and all of us can pour out and overpower the goblins." "That's a splendid idea," said Moonface, looking at Joe in admiration. "Simply wonderful," said the girls. Joe was pleased. "And we'll unlock everyone's doors and they can all join in," he said. "My goodness, this is going to be exciting. Can you see how dreadfully angry the angry pixie will be? And Mr. What's-his-name? Those goblins had better watch out." Everyone chuckled. The red squirrel touched Joe's knee. "Will you give me the note then?" he said. "I know where Mr. Whiskers lives, and I will take the letter to him and let him call all the elves together." Joe took out his pencil and wrote a note on Moonface's paper. He folded it and gave it to the red squirrel, who folded it even smaller and tucked it inside his cheek. "That's in case I'm caught by the goblins," he said. "They'll never think of looking for a note inside my cheek." He sat on his bushy tail, gave himself a push, and set off down the slippery slip at a tremendous pace. Franny giggled. "His tail is his cushion," she said. "Isn't he a darling? I do hope he'll find Mr. Whiskers all right." "Well, we'd better just sit quietly and wait," said Moonface. "I don't want the goblins opening my door and seeing you all here. They'll know we've got a plan then." "We brought you some of the meal you didn't eat this afternoon," said Beth, and she unpacked the bag. Here are some sandwiches, some cakes and some toffee. We'll all have some, said Moonface, and I've got some pop cakes too. So they sat round quietly on Moonface's curved sofa and bed and chairs and ate and whispered, waiting for the squirrel to come back with Mr. Whiskers and the elves. Whatever would happen then? Goodness me. We're going to find out in just a minute. Here we go, the next part. This is chapter 28. The Red Goblins get a shock. It seemed a long time before anything happened. Then Moonface pricked up his ears and listened. Someone's coming up the slippery slip, he said. It must be the little squirrel. I hope it isn't a goblin, said Franny, looking rather scared. But it was the red squirrel. He hopped out of the slippery slip hole and nodded at everyone. It's all right, he said. The elves are coming. I found Mr. Whiskers and he has slipped out to fetch all his family. There are 51 of them. We'd better let the rope down then, said Moonface, and he let it slither down the slide. Someone caught hold of it at the other end and the rope tightened. There's an elf there now, said Moonface, and he and Joe hauled on the rope. It was heavy. They pulled and they pulled, panting hard. This elf is rather heavy, said Joe. And no wonder, for when they at last got the rope to the top, there was not one elf, but 5 hanging on to the rope. They leapt into Moonface's tiny round room and began to whisper excitedly. Moonface told them all about the goblins, and they grinned when they heard his plan. Down went the rope again, and this time 6 elves came up on it. By this time the room was very crowded, but nobody minded. We'll have to sit on each other's knees, said Joe, and giggled at the sight of so many people in Moonface's little tree room. The elves all looked exactly the same. They all had very long beards, though Mr. Whiskers' beard was the longest. It reached right down to his toes. The rope fetched up all of the 51 little men, and by that time there really was no room to move. Everyone was excited, and there was such a lot of whispering that it sounded like 1,000 leaves rustling at once. Now I'm going to bang on the inside of my door and tell the goblins I will let them know the magic spell they want, said Moonface. As soon as they open the door, you must all rush out and grab hold of them. Wait, I've thought of such a good idea, said Joe suddenly. Let's push them into this room of Moonface's and send someone down the tree to bolt the trap door. And when they slide down, thinking to escape, they'll all be nicely boxed up in the slide till we decide to open the trapdoor. That is a good idea, said Mr. Whiskers. 2 elves had better go up the ladder that leads through the clouds to stop any goblins trying to escape that way, and 6 of us had better slide down to the foot of the tree to stop them escaping into the wood. 6 of the elves at once took cushions and slid down the slippery slip. They shot out of the trapdoor and bolted it on the outside. They surrounded the foot of the tree, ready to prevent any naughty goblins from escaping. The rest of them waited for Moonface to speak to the goblins outside. They were all tremendously excited. Moonface banged on the inside of his door. A goblin outside shouted to him, "Stop that noise!" "Let me out!" cried Moonface. "Not till you tell us one of the magic spells you know," said the goblin. "I know a spell that will turn people into kings and queens," shouted Moonface. "Tell us it then," said the goblin at once. "Well, open my door," said Moonface. There came the sound of a key turned in a padlock, and then Moonface's door was opened. At once the whole crowd of elves poured out like a stream of water. Joe, Beth and Franny went out with them, and when the goblins saw the crowd, they gave a yell and leapt down the tree to warn their friends. 2 elves leapt up to the ladder and sat there to prevent any goblins escaping to the land above. Joe, Moonface, Beth and Franny climbed quickly down the tree to let out all the people locked into their homes. How glad everyone was. Dame Washalot was very angry at being locked in. "I'll teach those goblins to lock me in," she shouted. And the old dame picked up her wash tub and began to throw water all over the goblins climbing about the tree. What a shock for them. Joe couldn't help laughing. He unlocked Mr. What's-His-Name's door, and out came What's-His-Name, shouting and raging, followed by the saucepan man. What's-His-Name chased hard after the terrified goblins. The saucepan man acted in a surprising manner. He took off one saucepan after another, one kettle after another, and threw them after the escaping goblins. Crash, bang, clatter. There's a picture of all his pans that he's taken off his head and his body to throw at the goblins. They let out the barn owl and the 3 owls that lived together. They flew at the goblins, screeching and hooting. The angry pixie was so angry that he flew at Joe when he let him out, and Joe only just explained in time that it was the goblins who were to blame, not him. Beth let Silky out, but Silky was frightened by all the noise and shouting. Still, she managed to catch one goblin by throwing one of her curtains over him. Silky and Beth then took the goblin up the tree and pushed him into Moonface's room. When he found the slippery slip, he slipped down it in delight, thinking he could escape. But, alas for him, he stopped at the bolted trapdoor, and there he stayed, unable to climb up or get out. Many other goblins were caught that way too. They tried to escape from the elves by running down the trees to the wood. But when they found 6 strong elves at the foot, they climbed up the tree again to escape into their own land at the top. And then, of course, they found the 2 elves on the ladder who pushed them back down again. So into Moonface's house they went, pushed in by Joe, who took great delight in doing so. One by one they tried to escape by sliding down the slippery slip, and soon the slide was crowded with goblins, piled one on top of the other. Dawn came, and the sun shone out, lighting up the great branches of the enormous faraway tree. "Now we can see if any goblins are hiding anywhere," called Moonface, who was thoroughly enjoying himself. So he and the elves and What's-His-Name looked into every hole and corner, behind every branch and tuft of leaves, and pulled out any goblins hidden there. They were marched up to Moonface's room, and down the slippery slip they went. Soon there wasn't a single goblin left. They were all piled on top of one another in the slide, most uncomfortable and upset. "There," said Moonface at last, pleased with himself and everyone else. "We've got them all safe. My word, I am hungry. What about having a good meal?" "Look," called Silky, waving to a lower part of the great tree. "The faraway tree is growing ripe plums just down there. What about having a feast of those?" "Good," said Moonface. "Squirrel, go down to the 6 elves at the foot of the tree and tell them they can come up now. Hey, you 2 elves on the ladder, you can come down. Silky, can you make us some hot chocolate to drink? Plums and hot chocolate would make a lovely meal." Just as they were sitting down to eat and drink, a strange figure came up the tree. He was thin and ragged and knobbly, but his face beamed as if he knew everyone. "Who's that?" said Franny at once. "Don't know," said Moonface, staring. "He's a funny looking creature," said Joe. "He looks rather like a scarecrow to me." The ragged man came up and sat down on a branch nearby. He held out his hand for a cup of hot chocolate. "Who are you?" said Moonface. "What's your name?" asked Silky. Can you guess who it is? "Play a game?" said the thin man, beaming. "Yes, certainly. What game shall we play?" And then everyone knew who it was. It was the old saucepan man, without his kettles and saucepans. He had thrown them all after the goblins, and now he had none to wear. "Saucepan, you do look different," said what's-his-name, hugging him. "I didn't know you. Come and have a plum." The saucepan man looked alarmed. "Hurt your thumb?" he said. "Oh, I am sorry." "No, I didn't say I'd hurt my thumb," said what's-his-name, roaring with laughter and clapping Saucepan on the back. "I said have a plum, a plum." "Thanks," said the Saucepan man, and put 2 large plums in his mouth at once. "And now," said Moonface, when everyone had finished, "what about those goblins in the slippery slip? I wonder, what should we do with those naughty goblins? Wonder if you've got any ideas. What would you do with them?" The next chapter is called The Punishment of the Red Goblins, so we'll find out tomorrow how they are punished. Okay, bye-bye for now.